driving meaningful impact. Sopra Steria Next.
In today's webinar, Nicola Pritchard, Principal Service Designer at CX Partners, and Roger Swannell, Lead Product Manager at the Open University, will be talking about all things impact measurement, specifically how it can support business leaders to overcome common barriers, build their case for investment, lift brand reputation and market advantage, and reduce their operating risks. Now, Nicola is lucky enough to be working from beautiful Italy today. So to make sure we don't have any tech issues, her and Roger hopped on a call yesterday just to record the main content for today's session. But don't worry, they're both here live on the webinar and will be popping up to say hello in a moment. They'll be available throughout the whole session to answer any questions you might have, and then they'll be doing a Q&A at the end too. So just to introduce them in a bit more detail, Nicola is a principal service designer with 14 years of experience, bringing expertise in systems thinking and qualitative research practices that centre on achieving tangible value for businesses, their customers and wider society.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. It's great to see so many of you here, and I'm just really glad to be sharing the platform with Roger on a topic we're both really passionate about.
That brings me really nicely to introduce our second speaker, Roger, who is a lead product manager at the Open University with extensive experience in digital product innovation for impact-driven organizations. His career is focused on leveraging technology to achieve social impact at scale.
Hi, everyone. Very good to see everyone here. And yeah, really excited about talking about this.
And finally, just before we dive into the session, I just want to flag that if you'd like to turn on closed captions, you can find that in the bottom left corner. And then for the Q&A that we're going to be doing at the end, we'll be using Slido, which you should be able to see at the bottom right of your screen. So please feel free to add any questions to the chat throughout the webinar, and then we'll run through as many as possible at the end. So Nicola, I'll hand over to you to quickly introduce the session.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lauren. I wanted to try and create a bit of a tenuous link between impact measurement and our victory in the semi-finals of the Euros last night. And I was about to change my mind when I realised, to my delight, that there's actually really quite a good link. It's as simple as everyone in a team working together to move towards their goal, which is so much at the heart of impact measurement as well. I'm not a huge football follower, so my links with football aren't going to permeate this whole session. You'll probably be glad to hear, or I'll find myself in very deep water. But it was really powerful, I think, to feel what it's like when you have millions of people all wishing, hoping towards the same outcomes. And really, that's such a powerful thing about impact measurement, its ability to unite teams, keep them on their path towards having the most impact they can within their organizations, on wider society and on the planet. This presentation won't be able to compete with last night's gripping semi-final game, but I personally am really excited to see and to be a part of impact measurement gaining so much momentum in all of our spheres. It's obviously been a practice that's been well trodden, especially within the non-profit space, but we're seeing so much more of it now within the private sector as well. For many of you, this might be part of your bread and butter, and you've been doing it for many years. For some of you, it might be brand new. So wherever you are on that journey, I hope you can get something from today. And I really look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and your feedback afterwards. So I think Lauren's now going to start the recording, where I'll be kicking off with our 3 aims for today.
My 3 aims for today are to hopefully ignite interest and curiosity in the topic of impact measurement and how you can be embedding that in your day-to-day context. We'll be showing how it works and talking through a really simple framework to help guide you and teams through impact measurement practices in your day-to-day. We won't be going into detailed methodology, but hope to have many of those conversations following this presentation. And the third aim is to communicate and emphasize that both Roger and I feel that this is really a team sport. And we think there's a bit of a tendency sometimes to think of impact measurement as something that sort of sits over there, whether that's with measurement and evaluation experts or data scientists or senior leadership teams. And really, for impact measurement to be valuable, it needs to be a team sport. It's an inclusive thing that can really bring a lot of value in helping motivate people to align around shared goals and work towards the things that matter. One of the things I love about impact measurement is its versatility, and hopefully the tooling that you'll see today also shows just how it can apply in so many different contexts. Before we go into the detail, we wanted to just take a step back and think about what impact means to you. So if you haven't already, do share in the chat what that word conjures up. What does it mean to you in your work at the moment? What does impact look like? For us, impact is, and if we go back to kind of the simplest definition in the dictionary, impact is about a marked effect or influence. Or to expand that out a little bit, what we're talking about is the sustained effect of what we do over the longer term. And normally when we're measuring impact, we're both wanting to ward against harm as well as maximise the positive impact of what we're doing. And so when we're talking about impact measurement, we're talking about the process of identifying, collecting, analysing data to understand the extent to which what we're doing is having a positive effect on our users, on communities, on wider societies, and also on our own organisations, since for many of us, organisations are our vehicles for having that impact. There are a number of challenges that leaders face today when it comes to impact measurement. And the three that really stood out for us are around balancing tactical and strategic priorities, so that we know that all of us face economic, social, environmental challenges that mean that teams face kind of downward pressure to focus on really urgent, immediate priorities, and that can make it harder to keep focused or to prioritise longer term strategic priorities that will enable us to deal with some of the more systemic challenges in front of us. And so balancing those two things is really difficult. And say you are balancing those two things, it's also really difficult to keep our day-to-day execution anchored in that strategy and not be waylaid by those urgent priorities. And then the third challenge is around how we demonstrate value and impact, how we identify the meaningful metrics that tell us whether we're staying on track towards our strategic goals. And that can create a sort of missing middle where teams have quite a lot of clarity on day-to-day delivery. Are we doing things right in the now? And quite a lot of clarity around long-term value and impact generation in terms of most organizations currently having a kind of a long-term mission or vision. But what's often missing is that connection between what we're doing today with where that long-term mission is trying to take us. And that comes at a cost, both in terms of at an organizational level, in terms of an increase in various different kinds of risk, and also it can create kind of motivational drift within teams, but also on users in terms of less of an ability to respond and to predict impacts on wider society and on our user base. And yeah, as I said, that can also have an effect on wider societal inequalities, on environmental harms, and mean that we're truncating the impact that we might be able to have had we been able to fill that gap more effectively. But Roger, I'm keen to bring you in and to hear from you how these challenges play out in your context.
Yes, I think my reflection from 10 years in the non-profit sector, which has a history of kind of measuring impact, is that even with the best intentions, it can be really hard to bridge that gap between delivering the work and measuring the impact. And the gap is often an awareness and a knowledge gap. So there are teams having an impact, they can't not. They're putting things out into the world and they change what people do, that has impact. The teams probably don't know what their impact is. They don't know how the change they create affects those people. They don't really know how their impact is measured and understood by their organisation. So sometimes impact measurement, as you'd mentioned earlier, it's kind of seen as this specialist discipline. It's done by the data scientists and analysts. And I think that's a good thing. It brings rigor to how we measure. But often it happens after the work has been delivered and it's separate from the teams who do the work. And those measuring the strategic impact of the organization aren't always aware of what work is going on in the product and service teams. And it's this disconnection that contributes to that missing middle between day-to-day delivery and the long-term strategic goals. So if impact measurement is important to an organization, and it absolutely should be, then that awareness and knowledge and skills have to run as a thread through everyone's work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Roger. And I think it's especially visible, I think, when it comes to digital product and service delivery, because there becomes this sort of disconnect between agile, iterative design and delivery mechanisms versus evaluation processes that do seem to be happening after the fact, that do seem to be disconnected from that kind of iterative cycle of improvement. So the more all of it can be embedded and brought together, the more valuable impact measurement has on, the more value it has on teams doing the work, and the more teams can contribute to meaningful measures. Brilliant. So where is the opportunity then? For us, we think the opportunity is to support all of our teams to stay focused on what matters. And we've built a really simple framework for doing that, called Scanning for Impact, Mapping Towards the Impact, and Measuring the Impact. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But really what this does is to create some structure, to create a space for having these kinds of conversations within our teams, to be asking questions that enable us to surface our assumptions around how change happens, and to also create a kind of single point of truth, particularly within that mapping part, creating that living document that we can refer back to, that we can update as we learn about our context through our scanning exercise, and as we learn about our impact through our measurement exercises. So that becomes a really helpful uniting centerpiece that can motivate teams to continue working towards the right things. And if we are to integrate impact measurement into our business as usual, we think there are lots of benefits to that. And that's about better balancing short-term and long-term strategy. It's about better balancing inward and inward-looking organizational strategy and planning with more consideration for externalities. It means widening our lens so that we're considering the implications and the consequences of what we're doing. It means better balancing outcomes and outputs and outcomes, or that way around. And it also helps us to be more proactive, and therefore to prevent and mitigate the risks of harm. And the kind of cumulative effect of all of those things is that we're supporting teams to be more unified and more motivated towards the right things, helps give us that foresight and resilience, help us prepare for ESG obligations and other obligations that we know are coming through the regulatory landscape, and also helps us better manage our risks. So what does it involve? At its core, it involves a backwards mapping process from the impact that we want to have in the world, all the way mapping back to the things that we're doing. And really the mapping exercise is around, it's hypothetical. So we're kind of bringing out our assumptions around how we think change happens, and creating kind of a logical flow of, okay, how does this outcome lead to this outcome, and what is that chain of events that we think will play out, so that we can then kind of put a bit of a collective stake in the sand around, okay, well, we think that our first aim is to reach this point, and we want to learn whether that's happening, and our assumption is that that point will then lead us to the next milestone. And so it gives us focus, it gives us alignment, and it helps us, like I said before, connect what we're doing in our day-to-day with that longer term view. And this is a really, really silly example, but just to illustrate, so the example of, I really want to improve my memory. This is a real thing. I have a terrible memory. And so my solution to that, let's call it an impact aim, is that I'm going to go to bed early. And my assumption is that if I go to bed early, I might consume less caffeine and less sugar, and I might choose richer and healthier foods, which might improve my energy. And by improving my energy, I might be more likely to do more exercise. And if I do more exercise, we know that exercise is proven to improve brain capacity and to lower stress. And also better sleep might help lower my stress too. And the combination of those things might then help improve my memory. Let's hope. But just as an example to show how that logical flow exists and how this can be a really simple exercise. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, and using simple terms that we all understand within our teams, no matter what function we're in or what expertise we hold, is really, really valuable. That was an example at an individual level, but what I think is so powerful about impact measurement is its versatility and the fact that it applies on so many different levels, whether you're thinking about individual impact at an individual level, or at a team level, or a product level, organizational level, or even at an ecosystem level. And the best impact strategies will straddle a number of these, or see a number of these layers working in concert. And so, yeah, it's and of course, the sorts of outcomes that you'd be tracking against those different levels would also evolve and adapt and look quite different. So another example would be, let's take a non-dairy milk brand. And so just a really sort of simplified outcome map here, so the solution they've got is that they're providing sustainable alternatives to dairy products. And their assumption is that by doing that, they're making healthier, more sustainable food choices easier for people. And by doing that, they're aiming to reduce consumption of dairy market products in the market, which might in turn influence the food system towards producing more plant-based products. And the cumulative effect of all of that is that that they're improving health outcomes for people, and also reducing the carbon footprint within the dairy food industry. And the great thing about doing something like this is that the brand team can then, or the product team can then hold themselves accountable for, is what we're putting out in the world, is it likely to improve health outcomes, or is it likely to reduce the carbon footprint of consumers, and what is our assumption around how that will happen? And it can also hold teams accountable to ensure that they're not kind of being sidetracked by other organizational or product priorities. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of vegan products in the market, for example, that don't improve health outcomes or don't reduce the carbon footprint, even if that's what they were setting out to do in the first place. So, Roger, again, it'd be great to hear from you in terms of what your experience of impact mapping's been, how that's helped your teams, and any reflections on your side.
Yeah, so I can talk a bit about the kind of day-to-day work that I do at Open University. So Open University was founded by Royal Charter in 1969. It's the largest university in the UK by number of students, with over 200,000 people studying. And its mission is to be open to people, places, methods and ideas, to promote educational opportunity and social justice by providing high quality university education to all who wish to realise their ambitions and fulfil their potential. And that concept of being open is really important when we talk about the impact OU is aiming for. So open means no entry requirements. You don't have to get 2 A's and a B to study at the Open University. You don't have to have previously succeeded in your education at all to get a degree. You can study regardless. Now, back in 1950, there were fewer than 20,000 students awarded degrees. By 2010, that had grown to over £500,000 a year. And we know that the average graduate earns £10,000 more than non-graduates. So that's a lot of people earning more money and making their lives better. And that's the kind of impact that Open University is driving towards. So there's plenty of information there that tells us that's impact worth having. But being open isn't enough on its own. It doesn't proactively tackle barriers to education. And of course, the Open University can't solve these big, wicked problems alone. But by connecting the impact to the team level, it helps us focus on the work we can do to lessen those barriers. So this means building products and services that are accessible, easy to use, based on user research, have support for students built in, etc., etc. And it guides our decision making when we think about things like a self-serve approach to education, so people can study when suits them, and the support they can get so that they are not left studying on their own and we can help them succeed. It means that an awareness of impact gets baked into our products. So this simple example you can see on the screen shows some hypotheses for how student communications contribute to helping students succeed. It creates the causal chain from the impact to the outcomes we want to see, all the way down to the university's investment into that team that's going to contribute to having that impact. So in reality, there isn't only one chain. Having impact relies on lots of chains linking together, contributing all the different outputs that lead to different outcomes. And a team can go deep, thinking about all the different outcomes that are necessary to contribute to the impact they want to have and how their outputs achieve those, and all the while connecting up through this chain. So anyone here from the product community will know about the shift in teams focusing from delivering outputs to achieving outcomes. And that's important, but it's not the whole picture. I think teams shouldn't stop with outcomes. Achieving an outcome of changing someone's behavior doesn't tell us whether we've led to achieving impact. So good impact mapping goes beyond that. It connects things more. It gives us a more complete view of how one thing contributes to another. And it's this causal connection that's this important concept for impact mapping. So it's a great exercise to do with teams. It helps think about how their work contributes to bigger things, and it's really useful for starting conversations with leaders. But on its own, it's not enough. It's just a bunch of hypotheses that can easily be forgotten in the day-to-day business of work. So what I do here, it's not a complete framework. It's not robust enough. It doesn't have enough measurement in it to make it stick. And that's kind of what we need. We need a more robust framework. We need better tools for impact mapping.
Brilliant, thanks, Roger. And I think that leads us on to talking about what can we do to provide that structure so that the impact mapping process is baked into a wider process of scanning for impact, measuring the impact, and scanning for impact, mapping the impact, and measuring the impact. And we're going to talk about these three layers in a little bit more detail. So really, when it comes to scanning for impact, our main aim is to understand as a team where we're at and understand how mature we are in terms of being impact driven in our decision making, being impact driven in our design of our products and services, and being impact driven in the kinds of metrics that we're tracking. And we've developed a simple maturity assessment, which we'll be sharing after this webinar to get started. The other element of scanning for impact is around exploring those opportunities, exploring the kinds of users and non-users and wider communities that live in our ecosystem around our products and services, to think about where there are opportunities for more impact on people and on the planet. And then also scanning for consequences, exploring what are the potential risks and harms of what we're doing and mitigating against those. And then we move into mapping towards impact. So that's where we run the kind of mapping exercises that we've been showing earlier on in this presentation. So that's about establishing those long-term impact targets, exploring barriers to getting there. Why haven't we achieved that impact yet? What's stopping us? And then mapping outcomes to overcome some of those barriers. And then prioritizing the outcomes that we think are really crucial for our products and services to achieve that impact. What are the non-negotiables? What are the things that we know have to be true for us to be able to achieve what we need to achieve? And then the final stage is that measurement piece. So creating a really clear measurement plan that is universally understood across our product and service teams, creating the governance and protocols that give us confidence that we've got the things in place to make sure we're doing things well and doing things right, and collecting and analysing that data, and then baking that collection process into our day-to-day cycles of measurement and reporting. So just to give an example of how this might play out, we recently worked with a household brand who had set an ambitious decarbonisation target, and their product team were working on a on a tool to support their customers with their decarbonisation journeys. And they found that the tool had so far been kind of well received, but they were struggling to kind of quantify its impact and what it was actually achieving. And from their current performance tracking, they could see that lots of their customers were engaging with the tool, but they didn't have the KPIs to track how that engagement was translating into behavioural changes and also on tangible reductions in their emissions. And they were also slightly paralysed by a lot of different expert opinions, different views internally from different stakeholders around the direction of travel that that product should take. So what we did was use ScanMap Measure to explore and reach a unified conclusion around the impact that that product was aiming towards and create the outcomes that would ladder up towards that longer term view. We brought in expertise around sustainability consulting to support understanding the political, economic, technological, legal, environmental landscape that this product was operating in, explore other products, what others were doing to have that impact, what was working well, what wasn't working well. We reviewed insights from existing user and stakeholder research. We surveyed wider stakeholders to understand how that product strategy laddered up to wider portfolio strategy around decarbonisation, and we ran an impact mapping workshop with stakeholders to get that alignment and that focus. And then we wrote that up into an impact narrative that became a kind of a story that could be used to galvanise other people in the organisation, so that everybody was understanding the focus of that product in its evolution. So this is just a sample map. None of the content is actually accurate, but essentially the map that we created had kind of 3 levels baked into it. So it was looking at a kind of outcomes from a product and experience level. How was the product engaging users? How was it performing on a day-to-day basis? How were those outcomes at a product level laddering up to portfolio level outcomes? How were those portfolio level outcomes laddering up to the wider organizational outcomes, and how were they in concert working towards the longer term impact of reducing carbon emissions? But it doesn't start looking kind of really perfect and kind of well organized. It often starts a little bit like this. So a kind of messy version, a lot of brainstorming. Outcomes mapping is a generative exercise where you're kind of thinking about all of the potential routes towards your impact, and then the real work sets in when you start to consolidate and think about what are the actual logical steps between these different potential routes towards our impact. So the benefit of doing something like this for this particular team was that it created a lot of alignment, and in their case they had been grappling between stakeholders around whether their targets should be organizational or whether they should be environmental. So which one, where were they putting their priorities? And they agreed that that for this particular product, they really needed to prioritize sustainable action amongst their customers over profit for their organization, that this product was about sustainable action primarily. And that was seen as a major milestone. And but other kind of benefits of doing this was that we developed a detailed breakdown of short and medium term outcomes that product teams could then align around in terms of the customer experience outcomes that they were working towards, also understanding how what they were doing was fitting into that, what piece of the puzzle they were contributing to in terms of their portfolio strategy and their organizational strategy. And doing this exercise also helped teams recognize that they were spreading themselves really thin, that looking at the volume of outcomes that they were looking towards was overwhelming, and it helped them to recognize that they needed to reduce who they were targeting, at least initially. So it enabled them to prioritize and focus their efforts on specific target groups and to work smarter and not harder. And Roger, so bringing you into this around how to, once we've done this mapping exercise, once you're thinking about measurement, how has that played out for you, and what are your views on measurement in particular?
Yeah, I think it can be really challenging. I think whether you work at a plant-based drinks company or a household brand or distance learning university like me, measurement is challenging. It's hard because impact always has a combination of factors, most of which are out of our control and sometimes far off. So, like at the OU, someone can take 8 years to complete their degree, and they may or may not be in a field that gives them promotion opportunities. And there's almost certainly other things going on in their life that affect whether they can achieve that goal. And we sometimes don't even know whether we've kind of had the impact for them. So it's challenging. And maybe this is why some organizations avoid measuring their impact. But even though it's hard, it's definitely worth doing. And you can get started pragmatically rather than kind of aiming for perfection. There's really good benefits to be understanding how you map and measure your impact.
Brilliant. Yeah, I agree. And we'll come back to that pragmatism point in just a moment, actually, in terms of where to start and how to start. And I think one of the first things to think about is at what point you're at in your journey. So if you are starting with a blank canvas and you haven't yet developed your product or your solution or your intervention, then impact measurement can be a really useful way of setting direction and actually guiding that decision making around what is that long-term impact that you want and what kinds of solutions might get you there. So it's that future looking view. And that is probably the most impactful time to be using impact measurement to guide that process. Or you might be in the now, in that you've got a bunch of products and services already in flight, and what you need is for impact measurement to help connect what you're already doing with your existing organizational strategy. And that's also really useful for finding out where those gaps might be, or where there is actually a gap in logic between what you're doing and what you're aiming for. Or finally, you might actually be needing to use impact measurement in a more reflective way, where you've kind of reached a point in a product or service lifecycle where you need to be thinking about how has what you've done so far achieved the impact that you wanted. The risk of doing it at this point is that you may have been measuring the wrong things, and so it might be harder to connect those dots. So ideally, you'd be reaching that backwards looking view, having already been through some impact measurement practice ahead of time, but it's also still useful in terms of guiding that reflection process and thinking about how you can then pivot towards having a greater impact in the future. The second element is deciding what's good enough. So I think within this space, it's such a kind of broad space that you could be spending just a couple of workshops on some impact measurement, if that's appropriate for where you're at, or you might be spending 6 months on it. And it doesn't have to be costly, it doesn't have to be lengthy or complicated. The key is to find what's good enough to increase your confidence as an individual or as a product team or as a group of people, that you're focusing on the right things. And really that's the goal dust of doing this, is it giving you confidence that you're working on the right thing, and that you're maximizing the good that you're having in the world whilst avoiding harm. And the questions to ask around that are kind of what's proportional to the scale of the product or organization I'm in, what's proportional to the complexity of the space, what resources do I have, what data capabilities do I have, for example, what skills are at my disposal, and also how will I be using this information? Will I be using it to make simple product pivots, or am I looking to build a really robust impact report, for example? And the kind of levels of detail and data that you'll need will vary greatly. And then the final point is to be outward looking, to get outside help. So it can be really useful to have somebody outside your immediate team to facilitate those conversations. And also, this is an inclusive process. The idea is to bring a whole range of voices into how you do that mapping exercise, and make sure that you're being outwards, that you're getting feedback, that you're involving different teams and different people into that, so that you're bringing that voice in. And to treat outputs as continuous works in progress, that they're never final, they're never designed up and polished, they're constantly evolving as your product and service evolves. And the final point is that we've obviously been spending at least a couple of years developing some of the methodologies that we're using with the people that we work with, and we've got so much to share and to talk about, and would love to see how what we've shared today can apply more specifically in your context. So we'd love to hear from you after this session. And the final point I just wanted to make was that really there's nothing can be lost by introducing impact practice into our day-to-day. At its worst, it'll create some really healthy dialogue and debate. It'll help us surface some of the assumptions that might not have otherwise been surfaced, and that can create just really good discussions. But at its best, it can be a really motivational tool. It can help build kind of non-binding social contracts within our teams that align us, that bring us together, and then that can also help us pivot what we're doing towards a much more impactful products and services that have a positive impact on people and the planet. And I think that's it. So I'll stop sharing.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button then. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts. We're now going to spend the rest of the session going through some questions from the audience, if that's okay. So as I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, please add them to the Slido at the bottom of your screen now, and we can run through them. I've seen we've had a question about sharing the slide deck, so we can send that out to you all afterwards as well. But the first one we've had was someone was wondering, who in their organisation should they involve when they're trying to start measuring their impact?
Shall I jump in? Yeah, really good question. And the first bit I'll say is that it depends what kind of scope that you're working with. So if you're looking at measuring the impact of your product, for example, that might involve a slightly different set of people than if you were looking at organizational impact at a higher level. So that will determine who you might want to involve. But in general, the most important thing is involving people who are closest to the insights, so people who have the best knowledge about the needs of your audiences and the people that are impacted by the work that you do. Ensuring people that have ownership over the direction over your product or service or organization are involved, so getting that senior level buy-in. And also bringing in diverse views, so making sure that, because this is a really good opportunity to unite and gain alignment. So if you're seeing misalignment or disconnect in things that you're hearing across your teams, this is a chance to bring all of those views in so that you can air those assumptions and find that common ground. Roger, would you add anything to that?
I don't think I'd add much, but to agree, yeah, it's very much about kind of finding the right people. Yeah, there's and finding the right, yeah, I guess the right kind of people who are interested. Those are already allies. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, I found that if you're kind of doing this over a course of a few different sessions, then you might want to mix up those audience groups. So you might start with doing an impact workshop with your core product team, for example, or core service team. And then you might kind of consolidate some of those ideas, turn them into something that you can test with a wider group and bring more people in the organization on board in a wider context, and then you might come back to a smaller group again, possibly with your senior leadership team, to get that buy-in again. So you could always sort of stagger it to make sure that you're getting the level of input that you need from different groups.
Great, thank you. We've also had a question about ESG regulations. Nicola, would you mind just explaining a little bit about what they are for people that might not know?
Yep, sure. So they're a set of standards and criteria and sort of governing actions around how companies and organizations report their social and environmental impacts. And there are some regulations coming in through the EU. CSRD is a really big one. A lot of UK companies might not necessarily fall under CSRD, but it's sort of seen as a bit of a kind of pioneering model. So it's likely that even if we're not currently adhering to CSRD standards within all of our organizations, it's likely that we will need to in future.
Great, thank you so much. We've had another question from Donna that is, what is the best strategy to employ when met with resistance to this concept and process?
Oh, that's a really good question. Roger, did you have anything on this one?
Yeah, I can try. So I think overcoming resistance to kind of new ideas and change in any organization, it's always about kind of finding those almost leverage points within the organization. Those maybe it's people who are interested in this kind of work, or where there is an existing problem within the organization that this kind of work can help to challenge, help to solve, help to kind of figure out things. And so overcoming that resistance is a bit by bit piece of change work that takes sometimes a long time, but is really important for kind of helping organizations evolve and use things like impact mapping. That's really, really important. It's a very kind of modern way of thinking about how we connect up work and not working in silos and things like that, all that kind of good practice stuff about ways of working. But yeah, certainly the overcoming resistance point is a challenge in probably every organization, and I think it's about like looking for those kind of those chinks in the armor for that resistance.
Great. I'd add to that as well, Roger, around maybe focusing on the emphasis on of the emphasis on of the cost of not doing it. So what would happen if we don't get a better understanding of our impact? So maybe sort of spending time trying to spot where there are already risks that you're seeing emerging because you're not where you don't have a clear logical view of how what you're doing is laddering up to your organizational strategy. So yeah, focusing on what those costs might be to get that buy-in, but also spending, especially where you're hearing kind of resistance from individuals, going in with a listening first approach. So spending time rather than inviting people into kind of group settings where they may be fearful of sharing some of their resistance, doing that in an individual setting first, trying to air some of those fears and mitigate those fears if you're able to, so that when you're coming into a group setting, there's already some of that alignment already built.
Great, thank you so much. We've had another one here that says, impact for some company means being able to keep customers and improve loyalty metrics. Do you have any experience in this dimension?
Just rereading that one sec. Impact for some companies means being able to keep customers and improve loyalty metrics. Do you have any experience in this dimension? I think that's a really interesting point, because one of the challenges and also the interesting aspects of impact measurement is that you're aiming to look at social and environmental impact targets in concert with organizational targets. There are always going to be targets in relation to organizational sustainability, because ultimately you won't be able to have any impact at all if your organization is not sustained. And part of that is ensuring that you're retaining customers, that you're growing your customer base, that you're improving your loyalty metrics. That's all part and parcel of that organizational sustainability. So the best impact strategies would be able to link how what you're doing, your organizational purpose, is delivering against that, and showing the causal connection between, okay, so actually our assumption is that we'll actually be able to increase our customer loyalty by demonstrating our environmental benefits for society. So seeing where there's actually connections between those two things is incredibly powerful. And then in terms of experience in that dimension, in the past have done some work within the financial sector with a large bank, for example, who was looking to show so within their organizational impact strategy, they were looking to show the connection between growing their SME, their small and medium enterprise customer base, alongside their like social development work. And so so we were doing some work with them to see how we could show the causal connection between those two things. But I think it can be done in lots of different settings. That's just one example.
Thanks. Roger, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, I don't think so. I think that, yeah, I can't improve on that answer. Thank you.
Oh, great. So we've had another question here. Oh, sorry, they just switch around orders a little bit. Where can I find more information / access some of the methodology to use for this?
Yeah, so we are going to be sharing some bits after this webinar. So some of the things that we mentioned under the scanning exercises. So we've got an impact maturity assessment, which we'll be sharing after the webinar to get teams started, and some sort of simple question sets to use within teams to begin asking those questions. And over the coming months, we'll also be sharing various templates and tooling to go alongside that, but also the methodologies and those sorts of tooling only go so far, and that it's all about kind of the context. So do get in touch as well, and we're really happy to share things on more of a one-to-one basis as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nicola. We've had another question that's just asking, could you give a brief summary of what's involved with service design, please?
That's a really good question, and I should be able to answer this as being a service designer. It also brings me fear because I'm sure there are lots of service designers on this call who'll be able to explain it better. It's funny. I think of service design as looking at any kind of service that we interact with. Almost, I imagine sort of shaking something out and being like, how does it work top to bottom and upside down, inside out? So thinking about things in a really holistic way. How do you design and deliver a service that that serves the customer, but also is efficient and effectively managed by your organization? So top down, upside down, inside out. And it combines, in my mind, it combines a kind of a number of different disciplines. It combines a bit of sort of business analysis, but it's also about really bringing in user voice and user research. And yeah, it's a sort of melting pot of all of these things. I wish one of my colleagues was on the call and could explain it better though.
No, that is great. Thank you. We've had another comment here from Leonie who said, it's a very helpful session. Thank you very much. She said that her experience is that stakeholders get hung up on what outcomes are. For example, wanting to commit teams to outputs of we want a blueprint. As an example, she said she's always thought outcomes as the thing that you're describing here, that you've been describing as impact. It sounds to her as though the bit that's important is to make the connection between the outcome and why that matters. Do you have anything you'd kind of like to go back to with her comment there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, because actually the term impact measurement's a bit misleading, because really most of impact measurement, and Roger, tell me if you disagree with this, but most of impact measurement is actually about output and outcome measurement. It's all about measuring the kind of the steps towards that impact. And really the big difference, or I don't know if it's even a big difference, it's all terminology at the end of the day. And if you use, it doesn't really matter whether you're saying impact or goals or target or mission. The distinction would be the impact almost like being the cumulative effect of all of those outcomes. So it's I guess that's a little bit more high level, a little bit more long term, whereas outcomes are the sustained changes that you'd see along that way. And I think a useful way of thinking about outcomes is thinking about the COM-B model of behavior change. So normally outcomes will combine a number of different things that enable people to change their behaviors, particularly if you're in a space where you are changing behaviors. So things like outcomes related to an increase in people's capabilities, their knowledge, their skills, their awareness, or increases in opportunities and like contextual opportunities for people to engage in something, an increase in motivation where they're being supported or have more ability to be motivated to act in a certain way. And then you've obviously got behavior change as well baked into that. Roger, did you have anything to add on that?
I think my addition would just be kind of repeating what you've said. Certainly from a kind of product point of view, I guess we think of outcomes as changes in user behavior, and outcome is, as you said there, it's wrapping up and rolling up all of those changes together over a longer period of time. What kind of effect does that have on the organization, on the world? And so, yeah, the outputs lead us to the outcomes, and the outcomes lead us to the impact.
Perfect. Thank you both. I think that's all of the questions that we've had. So unless anyone has any others they want to pop in, I think we can wrap up there and let everyone get 10 minutes back of their day. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you both for today's session. It's been great to hear from you. And then also just thank you to everyone for coming along. We'd love to hear your feedback on the session, so let us know how you found it. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Driving meaningful impact. Sopra Steria Next.